Welcome everyone to the first in our series of 4 Sussex Uncovered webinars, during which we hope to uncover and look at in a little more depth some of the urgent issues facing people and communities across Sussex. A little bit about me. I am Corinne, a trustee at the Sussex Community Foundation. I'm also the Programme Director at the Newhaven Enterprise Zone, which is how I came into contact with the foundation. The foundation manages a grant-making fund for the Newhaven Enterprise Zone, which makes grants to small charities and community groups in Newhaven that are making a positive social impact in the community. So bringing our attention to today, the agenda is a short introduction and background for me, setting the context. We then have 3 excellent speakers talking about the subject matter. We'll then move to question and answer with our speakers and also Kevin Richmond, the CEO of the foundation. And then Kevin will round that up and provide a thank you to our speakers and participants. And we will be finished by 5 p.m. A little bit of housekeeping to help with that. We have a chat function, so we would encourage you to comment via the chat box. We also have the Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A box and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A section or via email after the event if we can't get to you all. And please also do watch afterwards. We have a recording of the event which will be available to watch on our YouTube channel or to share with your colleagues. So let me begin with some background. So why did the foundation want to run these webinars? We wanted to look in more detail at key areas of work taking place in our communities to help shine a light on these local issues and the amazing groups helping to address them, and learn more to inform our own grant making. Following consultation with the voluntary sector in Sussex in the spring, we decided to relaunch the Sussex Crisis Fund, which has given over 3 million in grants in the last year to support people during the challenges of the pandemic. Last month, we relaunched the fund, the support and recovery phase as we come out of lockdown, hopefully this time for good. Taking account of what we learned from our discussions, the relaunched fund has 5 main themes, which are reflected in the issues we will be discussing in these upcoming webinars. Today's is mental health and wellbeing support, but we will also be discussing advice and support services, digital inclusion, food and other vital support, and reconnecting people and communities in the forthcoming seminars. So before I introduce the speakers, I wanted to give a bit of background to the work that we've been doing here at the foundation around the issue of mental health and wellbeing support, which is the theme of today's webinar. So just relying here on some statistics to help, the Office of National Statistics Opinions and Lifestyle survey reported that 1 in 5 adults in Britain have experienced symptoms of depression during the pandemic, with young people, disabled people, and renters hit the hardest. Between January and March of this year, the second lockdown, 21% of adults experienced some form of depression. This is an increase from 19% in November last year, 2020, and more than double the figure observed before the pandemic. Despite this, the number of GP depression diagnosis in England has fallen during the pandemic, which has led to fears that many people may not be accessing the medical care that they need. Disabled people, clinically vulnerable adults, those renting their home, and those living in the most deprived areas of England were more likely than average to experience some form of depression. Younger adults and women were more likely to experience some form of depression, with more than 4 in 10 women aged between 16 and 29 experiencing depressive symptoms, compared with 26% of men the same age. Britain's national lockdown has become a national sit-down, with more than 42% of UK adults admitting they are sitting for at least 14 hours longer a week. A new poll from UK Active has revealed this. I think most of us on this Zoom call today will recognise that the pandemic and the lockdowns have impacted to a lesser or greater degree on the mental and physical health for all of us. At the foundation, we have a long history of funding local charities and community groups that support people struggling with mental health issues, and we have given over £765,000 in small grants to projects where supporting mental health is at the heart of their work. During the pandemic, this area of work ramped up, and we gave a huge amount of funding to groups supporting people with befriending and projects that were tackling social isolation. Many groups have been extremely nimble in adapting their services to meet the challenges of lockdown. For example, many people who rely on group-based support to help their recovery, such as those recovering from drug and alcohol misuse, were forced to switch very quickly to meet over Zoom and other virtual channels. And we were there to support their switch to digital by funding laptops, software, Wi-Fi, and Zoom subscriptions. But the mental health and the physical health challenges faced by many over the last year haven't just disappeared. And as we move back to a more usual looking future, we want to be there to continue to support the Sussex groups doing this great work. We hope that today's speakers will help us all to understand more about what is required and where our funds are most needed. So importantly, to today's webinar, it's called A Great Place to Live for Everyone, how Sussex charities are helping to improve mental and physical well-being. And we are delighted to welcome our speakers. So today we have Dr. Kerry Taylor from Bright Pip, a charity which supports positive parent-infant relationships and infant mental health, working with families in Brighton and Hove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kerry Taylor from Bright Pip. Bright Pip stands for Brighton Parent Infant Psychological Therapy. And sorry, I'm slightly distracted because I can't get my slides to move on. There we go, brilliant. Apologies. Bright Pip is a very small charity with big ambitions to for all babies to grow up feeling safe and loved. We work from pregnancy to age 3, and we work with vulnerable families who are vulnerable for all sorts of reasons. And we're based in children's centres in Brighton. And the work we do ranges from mellow bumps groups with pregnant young women, right through to working with kind of toddlers and older ones. And that could be one-to-one or in groups. Our families are vulnerable for so many reasons, as I said, such as social exclusion and disadvantage, and living in the most deprived areas of Brighton and Hove, homelessness or housing difficulties, domestic abuse, histories of substance misuse. And many of our families, unfortunately, have had birth trauma or other kinds of trauma, specifically difficulties in their own parenting, so adverse child experiences when they were young, which means that they're really struggling to step up to become parents. As a clinical psychologist, I'm really passionate about this area, and this is a lot due to the fact that 0 to 3 is such a formative time. It's formative in terms of brain development and the plasticity of the brain. It really is the kind of foundation, what has been found more and more through research in neuroscience to be the foundation for social and emotional and cognitive development. A baby's growing brain is shaped by their experiences, particularly by their interactions with parents and other caregivers. And so this is why I feel it's so crucial to intervene at this time. I've worked in the NHS for a long, long time with families, and often I wish I'd worked with them earlier, with these families and these young people earlier on. Just to give you a flavour of the work we do, just wanted to talk about a case study with you. So this is a family I work with, and the mum was referred in pregnancy, aged when her baby was, well, when she was 3 months pregnant, and referred by her social worker and her midwife. We'll call her Claire. Previously, Claire had had 3 children removed due to problems with physical and emotional neglect, history of drug and alcohol problems, and her mental health, and also difficulties with domestic abuse. So she had a really difficult time. She was referred into mellow bumps, which is something we run with for pregnant women at 20 weeks gestation, but she didn't feel like she could leave the house. She was too anxious and fearful, and so she wouldn't go out alone. So in the end, I worked with her individually. We worked on Claire's mental health initially just to get over the agoraphobia, but also the main part of the work was really forming a good relationship with her so that she could process everything that was in her life. For example, grieving for her 3 children that she'd lost, but also understanding and kind of telling me that, you know, she'd been in care since she was 13, and also she had a history of a lot of trauma in her childhood, including sexual abuse from a very young age. So she was actually, you know, really struggling with a lot of trauma and trying to step up to become a parent, and that was getting in the way of being able to be a parent. So she named her baby before she was born. The baby was called Angel. We'll call her Angel. And she worked through all of these issues and engaged really, really well. And I just feel so grateful that we have opportunities to work with these families in this time when there's a window of change. So I'm so grateful for that. And just to give you a few quotes from at the end of this work, Jay, who was her partner, said, "I understand my partner and her needs in terms of mental health, and this has helped me recognise what I can do to help her. BrightPip is the service that recognises when we're overwhelmed and steps in to help, and I'd recommend it to any family. Also the Child Protection Reviewing Officer, so baby Angel was born and she's still with her parents and she's doing really well, said that every risk marker in the pre-birth period suggested a baby at very high risk of permanent removal. But instead, our work was able to help this mother form a strong protective attachment with her daughter. The impact of COVID with our families is the next thing I just wanted to talk about with you. And of course, as you can imagine, sorry, just trying to get my slides to move on. The families that we're working with, because of their vulnerabilities, have been really unfairly and really disproportionately impacted by COVID and the lockdown. So difficulties such as the distress they're feeling from mental health, employment difficulties or difficulties with housing or difficulties in terms of social isolation, as well as being in a really vulnerable time in terms of transition. So particularly families who are having their first baby, this is such a time when social support and connection and the community is so needed in order to enable us to make this transition in life. And so it was devastating really for families to have a time of isolation when it impacted on their mental health even more, and on all those difficulties. They didn't have as many protective families as other protective factors as other families. We found we had a 4-fold increase in our referrals. So we're a tiny charity, but we've worked with now 114 families in the last year. So a massive increase in the referrals that we normally have. And thanks to people such as yourselves and Sussex Community Foundation, we were able to step up and rally round and set up a project that was specifically about COVID support for families. So we were really pleased that we were able to meet these families, and to obviously had to do our service in a slightly different way, by telephone, online, walks in the park. But our clinicians were able to meet these families and meet their needs. And I'm so grateful that we were able to ameliorate some of the difficulties that these families have been facing in this last year. These are some of the quotes that I'm so proud that our clinicians have got who are working in the COVID family support team. So talking about feeling motivated and empowered, that it was amazing. And I feel like my BrightPip practitioner really saved my life. I'm just so grateful that she helped me. Saying that I was struck by how my BrightPip practitioner could get such a good understanding of me. And I think BrightPip's amazing. So it's such good words to hear when we've been working to reach out to these families, and that they want us to keep going. So thank you very much for listening to this story, and thank you so much to Sussex Community Foundation and all our supporters for enabling us to meet these families.
Thank you very much, Kerry. If we can now move on to Jackie Youlden for the next presentation.
Yeah, okay, that was brilliant, wasn't it, listening to Kerry there? And I'm really delighted to be able to be here to tell our story as well. It's amazing what a small amount of money and a lot of passion can achieve, really. So my name's Jacqueline Youlden, and I founded Running Space 5 years ago with the vision to promote life and to beat suicide. I'm a suicide survivor myself, but along with many others at Running Space, not only are we beating suicide, but we are living happy, hopeful, and very fulfilling lives. In a few moments, we'll show a film of the lovely Liz, who's one of our participants. It's a lovely film about her journey from suicide to living life in all of its fullness. So what does Running Space look like on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis? Well, the clue's in the name, really. It's about running. And that's really the tool that we use to support people that might be struggling with thoughts of suicide. And I just want to say thank you to the foundation, because all of our coaches that are homegrown have been funded. Their training's been funded by the Community Foundation, which means we've been able to multiply and begin to think about replicating, which is really exciting. And to see those those people that were struggling to live so much, to be really not only just integrated, but be passing on some of those skills and getting new people involved. Now, we all know that exercise is brilliant for our mental health, but I think in the introduction, Corinne said that people sit down for 14 hours a week longer during lockdown. And it's such a privilege, really, that we've been able to carry on delivering running space throughout lockdown. I think we've delivered it in 8 different ways so far. I think we're almost back to normal now, because running is so simple. But I think we know that the key to getting people active for their physical and mental well-being is it needs to be supported. So we know that GPs, we know that mental health services really want people to get active and to exercise. But even for the most motivated of us, that's really difficult to do, and there are a lot of barriers in the way. So we love at Running Space to remove as many barriers as we can. In fact, 80% of our participants have never run before, well, since school presumably, or have been completely inactive before coming to Running Space. And learning to run is really, it's a perfect activity really, because it's really, really low cost. We ask people to just have a pair of comfortable shoes and weather appropriate clothing. You don't need fancy kit. I've got my nice watch, which I love, but nobody else needs to have one of those. Part of getting independent is we teach people how to use exactly what's on their doorstep. So we teach people how to walk to run between lampposts, using bins, using their local playground. The other thing is that it's a transferable model, so people can run wherever they are. If they go on holiday for a week, or if they live in the middle of a city, if they live at the top of a fell or by the beach where I live, you can run. We just love to show you how and take you through your first steps. The other part of the running space model is that our home is the Pelham, which is an absolutely incredible, I'm going to say building, but it's so much more than that. It's a transformative place. It's a hub in the north of Bexhill. And Running Space comes under the shelter of that Christian charity. And after each running session, which we deliver 3 times a week in every location, we have tea and coffee. And the Pelham has a wonderful coffee lounge, which you'll see in the film, where people can just share, thanks to the funding and the support that we get, that free session plus free refreshments. Again, strengthening those connections and combating the isolation that people feel both in and out of lockdown, but especially through lockdown. And so when we talk about suicide, we are trying constantly to create networks of safety. So in our setting at the Pelham, people have access to all sorts of other activities as well. So I'll just a quick rundown of just some of the things that the foundation has supported and that run at the Pelham. So we've got the Pelham Grows, which is a gardening group for people with special needs. We've got lunch buddies, specifically aimed at breaking the cycle of isolation, crafting connections, table tennis, P84 youth. We have the job centre here, NHS 1U, and then we are starting a new amazing counselling service as well on our top floor, as well as a building enterprise. There's so much going on here. And the point about that when it comes to suicide and beating isolation is that, and getting people active, is that we're very visible, but in the heart of a thriving local community. So when you think about something that's hard to do, like running, seeing someone else take part in that activity can really break down a lot of the barriers to getting started. I should also say that the Pelham is we're in the 4th year of working with the local CCG as part of the Health and Wellbeing Community Hubs project. Finally, just before we get to the film, one of the arms of Running Space is that we deliver Safe Talk, suicide awareness and prevention training. So all of our participants that want to can access that training. We also deliver we've got one coming up for the local police and for the district council. It's for individuals and communities. If you think of it in terms of first aid, really, it equips people to recognise someone who might be having thoughts of suicide and then to direct them to further help. And we know that anyone who's done that training the usual time after completing that training to actually using the training they've learned is less than 6 months, and we've seen that happen a lot locally. Right, I think we should watch Liz's film then. I just want to give a little bit of a just a heads up really, because I know that we've got quite a large audience, and we know that in any group that size there might be somebody out there who has been affected by suicide in one way or another. And I would just urge you really to, if that's you, if you've been affected by any way, just tell somebody. It can be a friend or a family member, or it could be the Samaritans. Their number's 116 123, and that will be obviously anonymous, and it won't even show up on your phone bill. So given that, Liz's story is a story full of hope, and please watch and just applaud Liz.
It's an achievement, isn't it? It's something that I never thought I would be able to do. The journey's been long, and it has taken me a long time to get here. The anxiety and depression was so bad that going out with people around you just, to me, was terrifying. The anxiety would come on top of the feelings of feeling not wanted, not loved, not wanting to be out there with anybody, not even wanting to be here. The first time I met the running group, they came in and they'd come in and have a coffee and a chat afterwards, and I'd be there cleaning away, and I'm thinking, oh yes, that is just amazing, and look at them. I'd love to do it, but I just can't do it. It took me 4 years to actually get the courage to say, I can do this, I'm going to give it a go.
Most of the people that come to Walk to Run, it's by word of mouth. Liz is a perfect example. She saw us week in, week out, and eventually felt able to access it. We run to beat suicide. Those two things are absolutely intrinsically linked.
There was people with so many different stories that I didn't feel out of it. These are telling me stories and encouraging me to keep on going and to continue to walk regardless of how I feel. For the first time I began to be me again. And so the laughter was a tremendous healing process.
We all chat quite a bit when we're running. You're never really on your own at all when you're out running. But yeah, it was amazing to see the finish, hear them call your name out, and we did all finish together. The journey's been long, and it has taken me a long time to get here. But I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say I'm at my happiest than I've been in a very long time.
Just thank you for watching. I am so proud of Liz, and she has become one of our most terrifying coaches. You're welcome to come and let her teach you how to run from walking. And please come and join us at the Pelham anytime, and we'll shout you the best coffee in Christendom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing those stories. That was amazing. I'd like to introduce next Kim Shaw. Kim is from the Chichester Information for Young People, which provides information, advice, support and counselling for young people from the ages of 13 to 25 years.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and to Sussex Community Foundation, obviously, for all their support. Actually, I'm just going to wipe a tear from my eye after the video there. And thank you to Jackie and to Carrie for their presentations earlier. So to tell you a little bit about myself, first off, I've been involved with the Chichester Information Shop for young people for about 12 years now, in lots of different roles, starting as a volunteer counsellor, moving through to being a supervisor and a chair, and now I'm a trustee. So we're a very small charity too. We were established over 20 years ago, but actually became a standalone charity in 2012. And we essentially try very hard to relieve the mental suffering of young people aged between 13 and 25. We've got two parts to the service. We've got, which are very integrated. Firstly, we have an open-ended therapeutic counselling service, which means that regular sessions for our young people can carry on for as long as they want, and which is actually pretty unusual, because the majority of the time they'll counselling sessions are offered usually for 6 at a time. So that's a really important distinction that we are very proud of. Secondly, we have a drop-in area for young people to come in to get information and advice, guidance on all sorts of things. Sexual health is part of it, housing and homelessness. We have we also help people with money issues, obviously with family dynamics and all that sort of thing as well. So yeah, we help in the sort of main areas that we think young people struggle with in what we, I suppose, consider an increasingly perplexing environment for them to live in. The issues that young people face that we see on a day-to-day level, thank you. So just moving on to the next slide. Obviously involve depression, anxiety, education and work difficulties, home, suicidal thoughts, self-harm, OCD, eating disorders, which is quite a passion for me because I'm a counsellor who specialises in eating disorders, abuse, bereavement and substance misuse, all of which obviously have been exacerbated during COVID. So we've built up a well-established links with many outside establishments as well to help young people. We've often run counselling services for referred pupils at schools. We work with GP surgeries, other mental health professionals. We also work with young people who are put on waiting lists with CAMS or adult services, because often the waiting lists are quite long, particularly at the moment. And rather than people just being left without any support, we give them a sort of safe place, holding place, if you like. And we can also advocate to speed up some of those referrals. So our approach, if you like, as an organisation, because we've got these two arms to the whole system that we operate, there is this concept of being able to give people exactly what they need. So they can either have the emotional support, they can have the drop-in service, or they can have the counselling. So we give them this package that is suited to each person. Hopefully, we can also give them external help and point them in the right direction. We also collaborate very heavily with local young people in terms of what they think is needed, what more can we do, how can we change things, and all of our team collaborate together in that way. So that's a really important element just to mention to you. We're a person-centered organisation, which means we can give the time and space. Again, if I can sort of highlight the concept that we can see people for as long as they need to see us. So we've sort of give them that space and that time to build trust with us, and to open up more, and to really learn how to deal with their own emotions and emotionally regulate. Moving on to the next slide would be my case study. Interestingly, Kerry, we both picked the name Claire, which is quite interesting, because obviously the name's been changed. But just to give you a concept, a sort of general idea of how someone can move through our project. Claire was 16 when she first came to Chichester Information Shop, about 8 months before COVID. She lives at home with her granddad, and she started by telephoning our project, calling from under her bed, being very scared. She suffered childhood trauma and experienced flashbacks, or still experiences flashbacks, actually. She was often very down and has thoughts of suicide to end her pain. At first, she would only speak to one member of our team, but as that built, she eventually agreed to have an assessment and was quickly allocated a counsellor. She found it too hard to commit to regular weekly sessions, but she continued to come in for emotional support and to use the drop-in services. So she started gradually to communicate with more of our team on the phone, but also importantly, sometimes in person. There was one particular emotional support session where she had a specific flashback and really thought she was in danger, curling up in the corner of the room, and was seriously considering harming herself during the session. So our emotional support worker managed to bring her back and discuss a safety plan for the rest of the evening. So brought her back really to where she was in the room. And actually that was a real turning point for Claire, both in terms of her relationship with herself, but also in terms of her trust in our team. So when we sadly had to stop face-to-face work during the lockdown, Claire was one of the earliest callers when we launched the emotional support telephone helpline in May 2020. And since June last year, Claire's called every Friday, sometimes more than once. When she's finding things very difficult, she sometimes calls on other days of the week too. She then started working remotely with a counsellor and is slowly building trust in that relationship. So essentially, she's gradually growing in confidence and developing self-coping strategies to help her at times of extreme distress. She even has one or two good friends she now talks about who she knows she can call on to help her when she's feeling particularly low. Her particular counsellor also says that she's now starting to laugh in the sessions. And Claire is also expressing a genuine need to restart in-person support as soon as possible, which I'll come on to because we've had some issues obviously during COVID, which I'll move on to in a minute. In fact, I'll move on to that impact, which has probably been very difficult for us as a project. So we had to close our doors at the very start, and that took away obviously our drop-in service and our emotional support services. We did immediately transfer our one-to-one counselling sessions to Zoom or to telephone sessions, but numbers were reduced because essentially a lot of young people don't have a confidential space in which they can have a session or work with someone. And some of our volunteer counsellors also were in that same predicament. So it was really difficult for us to keep up our numbers. We also started a live chat facility in October last year. And we're very aware that seeking out mental health in the current climate has changed. So we are going to be continuing the remote stuff in terms of when people need that access to that, but we are also going to be focusing back onto the face-to-face work that we do. We recently did a questionnaire, and 87.5% of young people reported that they were worried about the longer term impact of COVID-19. So we're really anticipating a big increase in numbers coming into the service. We're also aware that a lot of other mental health services will continue to focus on the remote work rather than the face-to-face work, and we're wanting that warmth of human connection, if you like, those relationships that are built when you're in a room together. Sadly, the other thing that happened to us during COVID was that our previous premises weren't able to accommodate social distancing because particularly the counselling rooms were very tiny with no windows. So we have been looking for new premises, and we're very excited to have relocated to some new premises right in the main high streets, one of the main high streets in Chichester. So the footfall of young people is going to be hugely increased as well. And our whole team are incredibly motivated to grow what we do and to reach out to even more young people. We're also increasing with funding, with help, more paid salaried staff, and to increase some of the hours of existing staff. And yeah, we're just in the process. Literally, we've just moved in a couple of weeks ago, sorting out all the sort of operational side of it. We're also planning to open or extend the age range from starting from 13. We're moving down to ages 11 upwards, because we feel the transition to secondary school can be very fraught for young people as well. And we're thinking of starting, because of the larger premises, things like group therapy work, arts therapy, and we're very excited about the direction that we can hopefully go in. So that's just hopefully to give you a flavour of what's been going on. If just to really finish, if there are three things it would be great for all of you here to take away with you about our project, is firstly that we offer this open-ended service. So there is no time restriction. We don't have targets because we're not externally evaluated, although we follow all the guidelines for that. We're members of the BACP and follow youth access guidelines. But we are quite unique in that aspect of the project. Also, the idea that when many other places are going to be concentrating on remote work, we are very much going back to the in-person, face-to-face focus. And of course, with the expansion of hopefully our entire service, we are hoping to support even more young people. So thank you very much for listening. And yes, please ask any questions. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was very powerful, especially hearing Claire's story, but also considering those longer term concerns for young people. Must be really alarming. Thank you. A few of you have been putting questions to us in the Q&A box, and please continue to do so, because even if we can't answer them right now, we will get back to you after the session. So we've just pulled out a few of the questions, a couple specifically for our speakers, and then a couple which are a bit more general. So if I can go first to Jackie from Running Space. The question is, are you finding your service being prescribed by local GPs and other primary care providers? And who refers people to you if it's not them? That's a question for Jackie. You still got Jackie there? Maybe I'll come back to Jackie. She might be thinking about that one. So I'll go to Kerry instead at Bright Pip. So the Bright Pip case study is very moving and clearly makes a huge difference. But how long might you work with the families for is one of the questions. And how many clinicians do you have helping with this?
I'm unmuted. Yeah, thanks, Corinne. That's a really interesting question. And there's a big range, and so different interventions, designed to match what families need. The the work, the case study that I described was obviously quite complex, and that's, I think I counted before, something like 42 sessions, so a really long-term piece of work which involved a lot of building trust. And that's, I think, with most cases where there's a social worker involved, that's really needed. You kind of need a 3-month build-in time of establishing the relationship so we can really do the work and make a difference. The COVID Family Support, we're on the opposite end of the scale. The COVID Family Support Project, it's three sessions, so we thought we could reach the most families and kind of reach families who might not normally have come to services but were because of the pandemic, with 3 sessions. And there's 4 therapists who are working the COVID Family Support Project, all very part-time, all juggling family life, all, of course, when schools were closed, having to juggle all of the things that parents with young children had to juggle. And there's a mellow bumps practitioner, and there's also a practitioner who is commissioned by social care. So yeah, that's our little team, all very, very part-time. So I work in the NHS as well, and so do others, kind of juggling other work as well.
That's really helpful, thank you. And we'll come on in a minute to a more generic question about that issue of capacity and resource over the last year and how you've managed that. Thank you. Can I take the next question to Kim, if I may, the Chichester Information for Young People. Kim, why do you think we have seen such an increase in eating disorders in the last few years?
Yeah, there's been a huge increase in eating disorders, tripled number of people with eating disorders. I think one of the issues is that people have obviously been at home and they've had to eat with their families a lot more than they would have done, if they had been at school or at college. And I think that's been very difficult. I know a lot of people would say that social media has a part to play. In my experience, eating disorders, underlying eating disorders, always comes anxiety. So that anxiety is there, in a sense, a little bit like other issues. The eating disorder becomes something to self-medicate for what's going on. So I think there's a lot more anxiety for younger people now. I think things are very pressurized for them in lots of different ways. So yeah, I think there's a whole melting pot, Corinne, really, of why this is happening. But often in my experience too, eating is it's not something that you've got to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it becomes very pervasive and very difficult for families to deal with. But it's also something that you've got to learn to manage. So it becomes much more difficult than, say, an alcohol problem or a drug problem, where you can either, you're either addicted or you're clean. With eating, it's a much more complex, and again, takes a lot longer. So I go back to this idea that we've got this open-ended service where we can continue to help people with relapse prevention. So I hope that answers it a bit. There's no real pinpointed answer to say why it's increased, because it's a whole melting pot of different things.
I think that makes sense, doesn't it? That kind of exacerbation with the anxieties there. And I think it's a really interesting point you make as well about that difference between something that we have to do as a daily function and other things that maybe are more choice-based. But that's really helpful, thank you. And I suppose that leads on to my question for you, Kevin, which is why you chose mental and physical health as a focus for the relaunched Sussex Crisis Fund. But also if you could maybe explain why the foundation decided on the other 4 main themes for this 3rd phase of the fund.
Absolutely, thank you, Corinne, and thank you everyone for your presentation so far. They've been really incredibly moving, so thank you. So how did we decide on the themes for the relaunched Crisis Fund? Well, I guess we came back from Christmas holidays thinking, okay, well, we went into Christmas thinking things were going to be over, and came back realizing they really weren't over. But we knew also that actually last year there'd been a fantastic response from the public to crisis funds, not only our own but through the National Emergencies Trust and other funds. And the incredible generosity of the public was amazing, but we didn't expect that would happen again this year. So we knew actually we'd have to be more focused. So we actually went out and spoke to a lot of the charities that we'd funded over the last year and previously, and said, well, what do you see are the main problems? What are the main challenges that you're going to face as charities? And what are the main problems you're seeing in the community? And there was a really clear message. I mean, from the charities' point of view, they were seeing exactly what we thought, is that while there had been funding around for the immediate response to the crisis, they were very worried about what would happen this financial year, with the maybe compassion fatigue, but also with knowing that local authorities would have less money to give and so on. So a lot of concern about how charities would survive this year. They were also seeing increased demand, a lot of people coming to help for the very first time, people, as we've said, they're people who are new to poverty, who'd coped maybe quite comfortably before the pandemic, and then coped for a while on furlough, but actually things were really getting difficult. So that was why we picked up on the advice theme. Clearly, I mean, the mental health and the physical health concerns, I mean, we're all very aware of that, aren't we? The impact of the isolation that so many people have felt. And as always, of course, these things are much tougher on the people who are already disadvantaged. So that's how we got to basically the 5 themes. It was very much on consultation with the local charities and asking what they needed. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. We've just had another question come through regards older people, and I think this is quite interesting when we talk about social isolation and also capacity and resource as well. A question came through about and this is for all panelists, you might have different experiences, about the interaction with older people, or ways in which they can become involved through volunteering in terms of their time, experience and wisdom that they might bring to the groups that you're working with. Just unmute yourself if you'd like to answer.
Hiya. Yeah, sorry about the technical hitch earlier, but our groups are intergenerational, the running space groups. So we have older people in their 70s running alongside young people, even children as well. So and what we found, especially for young men and women, they get the wisdom and companionship of somebody older, and the older people get to do their thing, share their wisdom, come alongside, and it's an absolute joy to watch those relationships become meaningful and lasting. So that's how we do it at Running Space.
Thank you, Jackie. While you're here, Jackie, because we lost you temporarily before, I'll come back to your question if that's okay. Are you finding your service being prescribed by local GPs and other primary care providers? And if it's not them, who else would be referring people to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We're quite often asked who's eligible for it. And actually we have wide open arms. We can have anybody for as long as you need. We have people run with us for 4 years, 5 years, even some of them, and that's completely okay with us. We would love services to formally prescribe. We have lots of people referred, but so somebody from Health in Mind might say, refer that person, but what we would really like is to be able to go and sort of fetch them, because like I said, anyone if you're left to your own devices, it's too easy to not do anything. So we would love a bit more, we would just love to be more connected with those services that are so overwhelmed, and offer the genuine, lasting community support. So anybody is welcome. You don't have to have a mental health condition. In fact, 70% of people who are affected by suicidal thoughts don't have a mental health condition. Anybody who wants to learn to run can come for any reason at all, and you won't know in any group who's a suicide survivor and who isn't, who's struggling with their mental health and who isn't. The whole point is that you only need to put one foot in front of the other in a supportive group. So that's what we offer, and we'd love to find a way into, I suppose, more, make ourselves available and visible to clinical services to support the amazing work that they're doing.
That segues beautifully, Jackie, into my next question. Thank you. One of the questions from the audience is, one of the lovely things of all of the 3 projects, and this is for any of the panelists to answer, one of the lovely things about all 3 projects that you have in common is how you empower people to overcome the challenges that they face, something that perhaps stretched statutory services often struggle with. Do any of the panel have thoughts on how the voluntary and statutory sectors might support each other more? And again, unmute yourself if you would like to answer that, the panelists.
So shall I kick off?
No, but I just sort of said it really.
Well, I mean, I think I absolutely agree with the first part of that question. I mean, that's what I was going to say in my conclusion, actually, is exactly how the really strong message of that ability to get alongside people where they are and help them to move on to the next stage. That's what struck me with all of those projects, and it's a critical part of the voluntary sector, and that's something that the sector can do because of its independence, because it's not a statutory organisation. It's not linked in with the doctor or schools or whatever. So it's just a really important function, I think, of local charities and community groups, and something that statutory services need to value even more than I think they do already.
Agreed. Amen.
Kim?
Yes, and I couldn't agree more, Kevin. I mean, I think the research is showing that young people are meant to be seen within, or people generally within the NHS for their mental health are meant to be seen within 18 weeks of referral. And I think nearly half of people are outside of that time limit. So we work very hard. We do have a lot of referrals from GP surgeries and from CAMS and adult services. So we work quite closely with them. But the difficulty for us is probably because we're not target led. So when a young person comes into us, we don't necessarily take their address. They can be anonymous. There's nothing that they have to give us to access our service. And sometimes we have a difficulty with that the statutory services want us to meet certain targets or give them the details, so we have a fine balance to work, and we would much rather that was more understood by the statutory services, to be honest.
Thank you, Kim. I'm mindful of time. It's nearly 5:02. Unless the panelists have anything pressing on that question, I will hand over to Kevin. Kerry or Jackie, did you have anything else on that?
I'd only just quickly say that I think the more we work in partnership with statutory services, the better we are, I guess, because we're an infant mental health service. So yeah, I'll just add that in, because it feels like the more we're aligned and the more we can see each other's perspective and refer and work collaboratively, the better, really. So.
Are the spaces there, Kerry, for that collaboration currently?
Yeah, there are. We're embedded in the children's centres, so we're very much down the corridor normally from the health visitors and upstairs from the midwife. So we are, but it can, we can only work more on that, I think.
I really would like to ask more questions about the kind of how capacity and resource kind of affects this, but I know we haven't got time, so maybe that's another discussion. But it's obviously it's the thing in the room. Thank you, everybody. I would like to hand over to Kevin to wrap up and to also do the thank yous.
Thank you, Corinne. So my screen suddenly changed completely before my eyes. It's slightly disconcerting. But I think, as always, I think this is the thing that strikes me so much. I mean, today, but also every day working at Sussex Community Foundation, what a privilege it is to do our work. And what an honour it is to be asked to sum up that webinar. It feels very humbling as well, having heard the amazing work that the three of you have all done. So thank you for what you do, thank you for what you've done, and thank you for letting me do the sum up. It feels very humbling. But I think, as Corinne said at the beginning, the reason we're doing these Sussex Uncovered webinars is literally to uncover or shine a light on the amazing work that is happening in our communities every day, and especially in Sussex. I think we are really truly blessed with a really strong volunteer sector, with amazing people doing brilliant things. I think all of the groups we've seen today show how something that maybe on the surface sounds quite simple is actually transformative for people. Every one of them has shown how the compassion of getting alongside people can, starting from where they are, as I said earlier, can really help to transform people's lives and turn people around from sometimes incredibly difficult, challenging places. But I think to do that, it takes a lot of passion and takes a lot of commitment, and it also takes a lot of skill. And I think that's one thing I hope people will take away from today is a realization that, yeah, the volunteer sector is amazing and responsive. It's also highly professional, and there are very, very skilled people working in this sector. And they can make an enormous difference with a small amount of money. And I think that's a really clear message from today as well. I think again, the reason for we produce Sussex Uncovered is because many people see Sussex as a very wealthy county and think it's a great place to live, and well, it is if you can afford it. But for many people, they do really struggle. So we want to show and highlight the challenges that people face, but also highlight the brilliant work that local charities do to make Sussex a great place to live for everyone. I think over the last year, what we've seen is the most incredible response from local charities. The way that charities just stepped up overnight with the first lockdown to change the way they delivered their services, to do different services. I think that's been a crucial factor in the way many people have coped with the last year. And I know that there are many people on this webinar today who've been involved and are, working in those charities as volunteers or as trustees. So, yeah, heartfelt thank you from all of us for that fantastic work that you've done. I wanted actually to pick up 3 numbers. This is not about numbers, but I think there's 3 numbers that struck me from the presentations today that I really wanted to pick up. Kerry was talking about a 4-fold increase in their referrals. That's an extraordinary change. 4 times the number of people coming to the service, and you managed to do that and respond to that. That's amazing. Jackie talked about trying 8 different ways of doing the running clubs. That shows the innovation that's there. Okay, it doesn't work that way, let's do something different, let's find something else that works. And Kim talked about 87% of young people being worried about the future and the long-term impact of the pandemic. And I think that's a really sobering thought that we have to bear in mind. I'm very concerned about our young people coming through from this pandemic. So I hope today that actually we've done that. We've shone a light on some amazing work locally, and certainly you've met some amazing people, and we're just so grateful for the work you're doing. I think this is the first of 4 webinars, so the next one will be in September. So I hope you'll join us for all 4 of them. But do get in touch about the themes and the timing of that one. So it only really remains for me to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Corinne for chairing today so well. Thank you to Kim and Kerry and Jackie for your fantastic presentations and incredibly powerful and moving. Thank you. And thank you to everyone watching today, because I know all of you in different ways, whether giving your money, your time, your passion, your skills to the community. Every one of you I know is here because you care about Sussex and you care about making Sussex a great place to live for everyone. So thank you very much indeed.